Afghanistan government advisor who said that the world community needs to remain vigilant while observing how the Taliban treat women and children. Listen in.
In Herat, in the past couple of days, the Taliban who had taken over the city of Herat a few days ago have asked the women to go back home, those who work outside, and they have asked the women to from the university to not to attend for now. So this could be because it's a war situation, it's a security situation, but we must stay vigilant. The Taliban have promised this time that they will let women work outside. They have to. It's an economic factor. In Afghanistan, there are 700,000 households who have lost their men in war, and women go to work to bring the bread back for the family. These people need to be allowed to work. Women need to be allowed to attend education. It's an economic factor that women are partners in social development in any country, including Afghanistan. We will watch this vigilantly. And in case we see difficulties, we will continue the combat outside Afghanistan, inside Afghanistan, to extract these rights from Taliban for the women. But I hope that the Taliban have realized, according to what I've been listening and reading, and I spend a lot of time following everything, that this time there won't be a harsh treatment of women as we had seen 25 years ago.
Now, the latest reversal of fate in Taliban's capturing of the Afghan capital has created ripples across the world. Several world leaders and diplomats have expressed their concerns on the political shift in the region. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has slammed the Afghan forces for their inability to keep the Taliban in check. Blinken said that the international community spent millions to equip the Afghans, but it was all in vain.
I have to tell you that the inability of Afghan security forces to defend their country has played a very powerful role in what we've seen over the last few weeks. The fact is, we invested, the international community invested over 20 years, billions of dollars in these forces, 300,000 of them, with an air force, something the Taliban didn't have, with the most modern, sophisticated equipment. And unfortunately, tragically, they have not been able to defend the country, and I think that explains why this has moved as quickly as it's moved.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Sunday said the country is heartbroken over the latest development in Afghanistan. In a video message, Trudeau said Canada firmly condemns the escalating violence in the region and will continue to work with allies to bring back stability in the conflicted zone.
Canada firmly condemns the escalating violence, and we are heartbroken at the situation the Afghan people find themselves in today. This is especially so given the sacrifices of Canadians who believed and continue to believe in the future of Afghanistan. We will continue to work with allies and the international community to ensure that those efforts were not in vain. We are committed to Afghanistan and to the Afghan people.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson also commented on the latest Taliban advances, saying that US decision to pull its troops out of Afghanistan had only accelerated the crisis. He further suggested that the country should avoid prematurely recognizing a new government in Afghanistan and should focus on dealing with the advent of a new Taliban regime in Kabul.
I think it's fair to say that the U.S. decision to pull out has accelerated things, but this has been in many ways something that has been a chronicle of an event foretold. We've known for a long time that this was the way things were going, and as I said before, this is a mission whose military component really ended for the UK in 2014. What we're dealing with now is the very likely advent of a new regime in Kabul.
As per reports in the English media, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is likely to call a parliament session over the crisis. Downing Street sources say that the lawmakers will be recalled from their summer recess to discuss these developments. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas on Sunday had said that the seizure of power by the Taliban was imminent. He had further confirmed that parts of Afghan government had already left the country and that the top priority for Germany was to ensure security of German nationals and embassy staff in Afghanistan.
Teile der afghanischen Regierung befinden sich bereits im Ausland, haben das Land verlassen und die Machtübernahme der Taliban steht unmittelbar bevor. In dieser Situation muss oberste Priorität die Sicherheit unserer Staatsangehörigen, unserer Mitarbeiterinnen und Mitarbeiter in unserer Botschaft haben und genauso die Menschen, mit denen wir in den letzten Jahren in Afghanistan zusammengearbeitet haben.
United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres has also urged the Taliban to exercise utmost restraint in Afghanistan to prevent further atrocities. In a tweet, he wrote, "I am deeply concerned about the situation in Afghanistan and urge Taliban to exercise utmost restraint to protect lives of people living in Afghanistan." Pope Francis, meanwhile, has called for dialogue to end the conflict so that its people can live in peace and stability.
Benedetto il frutto del tuo seno. Mi unisco all'unanime preoccupazione.
We earlier spoke with Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, who was an advisor to former U.S. President Donald Trump and retired U.S. military intelligence officer, who called the current situation in Kabul catastrophic and an intelligence failure. Let's listen in.
This is a major catastrophe for United States foreign policy. The Biden administration did not have any exit strategy. It's an intelligence failure beyond the scope of anything I've seen. And this brings me back to Saigon in Vietnam in the 1970s. So Blinken's statements are completely wrong. They're false. And he's trying to backtrack on a catastrophe. Look, my assessment is very, very clear. To begin with, there was an announced withdrawal by the Biden administration. How can they explain that before they closed our embassy, before they evacuated the lives of Americans still in that country, they withdrew American military troops? They can't explain that. They did everything backwards. They withdrew the troops. They left the Americans there. And as you and I are speaking right now, there are Americans and many others who are trapped at Kabul airport. So he not only had to send 3,000 troops in, now we have 6,000 troops in. And I assess that it'll probably escalate more before they get those civilians out.
Moving on, celebrations have begun in Zambia as the leader of the opposition party, Hakainde Hichilema, has defeated incumbent President Edgar Lungu in a hotly contested election. The incumbent president disowned the results much before it was declared, stating the election was just unfair and unjust. It took the opposition leader 3 attempts to defeat Lungu and 6 attempts in total to become Zambia's 7th president. Hichilema got around 3 million votes, mostly from regions that traditionally support the incumbent president. According to analysts, the dire economic condition and the erosion of democracy contributed to his victory. Zambia, considered one of the most democratic countries in Africa, passed the litmus test as per many experts.
We want to have one Zambia, one nation, where every Zambia can enjoy this leadership of Hakainde Hichilema. There's no tribalism in Zambia. We are a new government. What we want is the commodity to be on cheap prices, not the higher prices like chicken, no medicine, hospitals, whatever. Roads are not good. High cost of living. We don't want this type of leadership. We have police brutality.
Unlike the tightly contested elections in 2016, voters were angry at several issues like economy, unemployment, inequality, political violence. The incumbent government had swept to power in 2011 on the promise of jobs and reduction in taxes. Zambia's economy was highly affected during the pandemic. It became the first African country to default on its own debt and had to seek assistance from the International Monetary Fund. Hichilema began being a businessman, is expected to be more market-friendly and business-oriented. According to poll analysts, the key of the next government were in the hands of young voters this time. In a survey by the International Labour Organization, unemployment rose to a record height of 12%, Cost of living also increased significantly. The incumbent president alleged that the election was unfair, pointing out violence in strongholds of the opposition leader. Despite holding election under heavy security and military deployment, sporadic incidents of violence are being investigated by the Electoral Commission. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called for the federal election 2 years ahead of the schedule, asking its citizens to vote for real progressive leadership in healthcare. Trudeau announced that the election would be held next month in a bid to capitalize on the country's pandemic response, which has received cross-party support. The country will have its second election in 2 years, paving way for Trudeau and his Liberal Party to form a majority government.
This is a really important moment in Canada's history. For the past 2 years, for the past 17 months specifically of the pandemic, we've been making really big, really consequential decisions. And in the last election, nobody was talking about what we might do in a pandemic. So the government, and indeed Parliament, needs an opportunity to get a mandate from Canadians, to hear from Canadians on how to end this pandemic, how to build back better in really meaningful ways. As Canadians know, this is a moment where we're going to be taking decisions that will last not just for the coming months, but for the coming decades. And Canadians deserve their say. That's exactly what we're going to give them.
Trudeau is hoping to benefit from the high vaccination rate and post-pandemic economic boom to stabilize the government after failing to retain majority in the 2019 federal election. The Liberal Party fell 14 short of the clear majority in House of Commons after a video of Prime Minister dressed up with a blackface considered a racist act for which he apologized. In a research survey, more than half of the population say they are satisfied with the government. Experts feel an election at this time would hugely tilt to Trudeau's side. Meanwhile, Conservative Party Erin O'Toole criticized Prime Minister for the country's economic record under his leadership.
It's about who will deliver the economic recovery Canada needs. It's about who will take action to protect Canadians from spiraling living costs, from rising taxes, from poorer services. For the past 6 years, we've been promised solutions, and year after year after year, Justin Trudeau has let the Canadian people down. The result? Hard-pressed families struggling to pay bills and worried about the cost of food, of housing, of heating.
And with that, we call to wrap on this bulletin. Global news continues on the other side. Do stay tuned to WION. World is One.
Stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter for new alerts. Instagram for videos and images. And the website for the latest news, views, and analysis. WIONews.com. World is one.
From our studios live in New York City, I'm Susan Tehrani.
People from many different countries, some who have been in America for generations, others who are more newly arrived.
So what Joe Biden has tried to do is definitely try to frame the election as a referendum.
The US president even called President Erdogan an autocrat.
Hello, I'm Jodie Cohen, broadcasting from Jerusalem.
Israel might be on the verge of getting a new government.
Climate change will, for the first time, be an issue of important discussion.
Child labour increases for the first time in 2 decades, according to the UN.
To strengthen the alliance, boosting its defence capabilities and focus focusing on that.
Coronavirus cases are surging in Moscow.
There is a sense that authorities are beginning to run out of ideas.
The second and third waves of COVID-19 hit Europe very, very hard.
Tokyo's 7-day average has actually fallen. Over a week ago, it was over 800 new cases a day.
200 community drugstores due to be included over the next 2 weeks.
You're watching WION World is One with me, Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa.
President Muhammadu Buhari says this latest attack on school children will be the last to occur in Nigeria.
It doesn't matter who is looking for power now, but the fact that it's now going more on attracting humanitarian issues.
You're watching WION News, coming to you live from Nairobi, Kenya.
I'm Redi Francis, coming to you live for this newscast from Beirut, Lebanon.
It's a huge blow for what remains of the pro-democracy movement here in Hong Kong.
India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.
Vielleicht nur als Imposant.
Thanks for staying with us. You're watching WION World is One. My name is Mohammed Saleh, and let's start with the top stories of the day. Now, all commercial flights from Kabul have been suspended amid scenes of panic and chaos unfolding at the airport as thousands of Afghan residents try to flee from the country. The US troops also resort to firing shots in the air at the Kabul airport.
There is fear on the roads that is being clearly witnessed with these closed shops.
And WION's correspondent Anas Malik is reporting from the heart of the capital city of Kabul a day after the Taliban have stormed into the capital city and claimed victory, while President Ashraf Ghani has now fled from Afghanistan. And Taliban fighters have declared that the war is over as they take control of Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, and have also entered into the country's seat of power, the presidential palace. The Taliban have said that they will soon be declaring the establishment of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan from the palace. And US President Joe Biden holds security briefing on Afghanistan with members of his national security team amidst the unfolding security crisis in the country. And former Afghan President Hamid Karzai claims that the new interim council has been set up to run the affairs of the country, which will include him, the chief of the Reconciliation Council Abdullah Abdullah, and also the head of the Hizb-e-Islami Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. The United Nations Security Council is to hold an emergency meeting on the unfolding situation in Afghanistan later in the day today, and the council is to be addressed by the United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres. The death toll from the devastating earthquake in Haiti has now risen to over 1,200 as neighboring countries rush to send aid, and rescuers are scrambling to find survivors who could be trapped underneath the rubble.
Just more a checking on the edge of the penalty area.
And Manchester City begin their Premier League title defence with a defeat to Tottenham Hotspur. Son Heung-min stars in the absence of Harry Kane to give new Spurs boss Nuno Espirito Santo the perfect start to the season.
It's a little gem to enjoy that picture.
All right, so let's start this broadcast with what is happening in Afghanistan, where the situation is extremely fluid. Remember, the Taliban have captured Kabul, and the residents in the city are extremely desperate. Many of them who are trying to flee Afghanistan's beleaguered capital. There is an exodus that is presently underway in Kabul, but the Karzai International Airport authorities have now announced, believe it or not, the suspension of all commercial flights from the airport. Now, the closure of the Kabul airspace also means that Indian flights will not be able to operate now. Through the statement, the airport authorities have now called on the people to avoid crowding at the international airport in Kabul. Amidst the chaos, the United States troops, believe it or not, while there was a huge amount of crowd that had gathered on the tarmac at the airport, the US troops also resorted to firing shots in the air at the airport, resulting in more panic and more chaos amongst the desperate residents within Kabul. Now, after the takeover of the capital by the Taliban, remember, there are thousands of Afghans who have been trying to get out of the Afghan capital, Kabul. Thousands of Afghans had in fact crowded onto the tarmac in the hope that they could somehow catch a flight and go out of the country. The scores of Afghans had crowded the Kabul International Airport. There were some scuffles that were also reported amongst people who were unable to get on board a plane that was departing. There was another video that showed as to how people were shouting inside of an Istanbul-bound flight that reportedly could not take off. Now, urging the Taliban to allow Afghans and other nationals to leave the country, more than 60 nations have issued a joint statement saying that Afghans and international citizens who want to leave Afghanistan must be allowed to depart. The US State Department has also further added that airports and border crossings must remain open. It has further added that those in positions of power and authority across Afghanistan now bear the responsibility and accountability for the protection of human life and property, and also for the immediate restoration of security and civil order. The Afghan people deserve to live in safety, security and dignity. The joint statement has been signed by countries including the likes of Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the Republic of Korea and even Qatar and United Kingdom. The US Embassy in Kabul has also suspended operations and has warned Americans to take shelter immediately and not try get to the airport. According to a State Department official, almost all US Embassy personnel have now relocated to a facility at the Hamid Karzai International Airport. The United States has also secured Kabul's international airport to try enable the safe departure predominantly of the Americans to begin with, the thousands of civilians who are still there, and also of the American military flights. Several hundred employees of the US Embassy in Kabul have already been evacuated from Afghanistan. Accelerating the evacuation efforts, the United States has also sent in about 6,000 troops to the Kabul International Airport to assist in the quick evacuation of the embassy personnel and also the Afghan interpreters who had worked for the Americans ever since America invaded Afghanistan back in 2001. And also part of the departure plan are thousands of Afghans eligible for the US special immigrant visas. Now, despite what is happening on the ground within Afghanistan, the American Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has tried to play down America's hasty exit from the country. He still is describing this as some kind of a successful mission for the Americans, and he still insists that this is not another Saigon moment.
Step back. This is manifestly not Saigon. We're working to make sure that our personnel are safe and secure. We're relocating the men and women of our embassy to a location at the airport. It's why the President sent in a number of forces to make sure that as we continue to draw down our diplomatic presence, we do it in a safe and orderly fashion.
All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what's actually unfolding in Afghanistan at this point of time, we're joined in by Mr. Andrew Whitehead, who's a writer and also a former journalist with the BBC. Mr. Whitehead, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this broadcast on WION. Now, what is happening in Afghanistan, many would say, was not something that was unexpected ever since the Americans announced that they would be leaving Afghanistan. A situation like this was pretty imminent, but could the Americans have managed things better?
Well, they couldn't have managed it much worse, could they? I think there was a realization that without American troops there to support and strengthen the Afghan National Army, it was likely that Taliban would make gains. But of course, nobody expected the rapidity of the Taliban takeover. Nobody expected an Islamic Emirate to be in place by now. This has not been, of course, an orderly transfer of power. It's been a disorderly moment of regime change. But for President Biden, who has to take responsibility for this mess, in political terms, he's not doing too badly. With the American voters, the military presence in Afghanistan was deeply unpopular. So his decision to pull out is not going to rebound, I don't think, politically, at least for the moment. But diplomatically, it's a disaster for the United States. Who would want to ally with a country which throws its allies under the bus?
You know, how badly has this dented the prestige of the Americans? Looking at the manner in which the Americans have beaten a retreat from Afghanistan, many say that this is actually worse than the exit from Saigon.
Well, it certainly has done a great deal of damage to America's global standing. The only people who will China, I mean, seeing their main rival discomfited. There are clearly analogies with the end of the Vietnam War and the pullout from Saigon, the chaotic scenes at the airport, the helicopters lifting from embassy roofs, and those analogies are very striking. But on the other hand, let's remember that in the Vietnam War, the Americans lost many, many more soldiers. The American army in Vietnam was in large part a conscript army. So politically, this plays in quite a different way. And as I say, at the moment, among the American public, the American military pullout from Afghanistan is a popular move.
Right, now, looking at the future of Afghanistan, the last time the Taliban were in charge in Afghanistan, they were pretty much a pariah state. Only Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates had recognized the Taliban back between the years 1996 and 2001. But are things different this time round? Will the Americans still continue to talk to the Taliban and do business with the Taliban?
I think the Americans will be very reluctant to do business with the Taliban, at least for quite a while. I think a lot depends on what shape this Islamic Emirate takes. And some people, such as Sahel Shaheen, the Taliban spokesman in Qatar, who was in the previous Taliban rule for a while their ambassador in Islamabad, he says the Taliban have learned from mistakes they made when they were in power in the 1990s. Let's see if that's the case. Let's see what they do about women's education, women's role in the economy. Let's see in particular whether they stick to their word in terms of not allowing Afghanistan to be used by violent jihadi groups. I think that will be the big litmus test. So there will be a willingness to engage in time, but only if the Taliban demonstrates that it has learnt from what went wrong for Afghanistan in the 1990s.
And also, my last question to you is, the Taliban claims that it has changed, that it has in some ways mellowed down. But looking at some of the videos that have in fact emerged from the Afghan hinterland of public beatings, of you know, those very violent reprisals in some cases that have been reported within Afghanistan in places where the Taliban has been in charge, should we take Taliban at its face value when it claims that it has changed?
I think probably not. I think they have to demonstrate that they have changed. I think there's a willingness among what seems to be the Taliban leadership to be more accommodating to the rest of the world, to try and make sure that under Taliban rule, Afghanistan this time round is not as isolated as it was